The USSR Vice President Gennady Yanayev has taken over presidential powers because of Mikhail Gorbachev's inability to act as president for health reasons. The Soviet leadership has released a statement saying that a state of emergency has been introduced in some parts of the USSR for 6 months. The USSR Constitution and laws take unconditional precedence across this country's territory. A state of emergency committee has been formed to govern the country and effectively implement the state of emergency. Its decisions are binding for all bodies of power and administration and for citizens all over this country. The committee has issued an address to the Soviet people. The message says that the policy of reforms started on Mikhail Gorbachev's initiative and planned as a means to ensure the dynamic development of the country and democratized life and society has reached a deadlock for a number of reasons. The initial enthusiasm and hopes have changed for the absence of faith, apathy, and despair. Power at all levels has lost popular trust. Political intriguing has forced concern about the destiny of the homeland and citizens out of public life. The vicious mockery of all institutions of state is being cultivated. The country has in fact become ungovernable. Having used the granted freedoms and trampling the sprouts of democracy underfoot, extremist forces have emerged and have taken the course toward liquidating the Soviet Union, doing away with the state and seizing power at any price. The results of the nationwide referendum on the homeland's unity have been quashed. The cynical speculation on national feelings is only a smokescreen to pursue ambitions. Political adventurists are not worried either about the present-day troubles of their nations or their future. It's for the people to decide what kind of social system there should be. However, there are attempts to deprive them of this right, the statement says. Instead of caring about the safety and well-being of each individual and society as a whole, individuals who have come to power have quite often been using it in the interests alien to the people as an unscrupulous self-assertion means. Each citizen feels growing uncertainty for tomorrow and deep concern over the future of their children. The power crisis has catastrophically affected the economy. The chaotic and spontaneous slide down to a market has given rise to an outbreak of regional, departmental, collective, and individual egoism. The war of laws and the fomenting of centrifugal trends have led to the destruction of the single national economy mechanism that has taken decades to create. As a result, the living standards of the overwhelming majority of Soviet people have sharply fallen. Improper second-hand dealing and black marketeering have been flourishing. For years, there have been incantations about adherence to the interests of an individual, concern about his rights, and social guarantee, the Soviet leadership's statement says. But in fact, people have been humiliated. Their real rights and opportunities have been infringed upon, and they have been driven to despair. It's obvious that all the democratic institutions created through the expression of the people's will are losing their prestige and effectiveness. Onslaught on the rights of people is on the way. The rights to work, education, the health service, housing, and rest are in jeopardy. Even the elementary individual safety of people has been more and more under threat. Crime has been quickly growing. It has been getting more organized and politicized. The country is plunging into an abyss of violence and lawlessness. The growing destabilization of the political and economic situation in the Soviet Union is undermining our positions in the world. In some places, there have been revanchist calls and demands for the revision of our borders. Some speculate about the possibility of partitioning the Soviet Union and putting some of its facilities and areas under international trusteeship. This is the sad reality. The pride and honor of the Soviet citizen must be restored to the full. The State of Emergency Committee in the USSR assumes the responsibility for the future of the country and is determined to take the most serious action to put an early end to the crisis in the state and society. We promise to arrange a nationwide discussion of the new Treaty of the Union. We are going to immediately restore law and order, put an end to bloodshed, declare an uncompromising war on the criminal world, and to eradicate the disgraceful phenomenon discrediting and humiliating the Soviet citizens. We stand for genuinely democratic processes and a consistent policy of reforms leading to the revival of our country, its economic and social prosperity, which would let it take a worthy place in the world community of nations. As we develop a mixed economy, we'll support private enterprise and give it the necessary opportunities for expanding production and the services. The statement stresses the Soviet Union is a peace-loving nation that will unswervingly observe its international commitments. It demands nothing from anyone. It wants to live in peace and friendship with everyone. But it insists no one will be allowed to threaten its sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Any attempts to use the language of diktat in relations with this country, no matter who makes them, will be checked. The State of Emergency Committee is calling on all Soviet citizens to render all-round support to its efforts to lead this country out of the crisis. The head of the country, Gennady Yanayev, has addressed the heads of other states and governments and the United Nations Secretary General. He has informed them that a 6-month state of emergency was imposed in accordance with the national constitution and other laws in some parts of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics as of August the 19th. This is a temporary measure, which in no way means the country is abandoning its policy of deep-going reforms in all the spheres of national life. The urgent need to save the economy from collapse and the nation from famine has dictated it. It is expected to avert the growing threat of an all-out civil conflict, whose consequences will be unpredictable for both the peoples of this country and the international community. The package of emergency measures is meant to work for an earlier stabilization, normalize the social and economic situation, and carry out the necessary reforms and create conditions for the comprehensive development of the Soviet Union. Any other way would lead to growing confrontation, violence, and misery, and would create a dangerous flashpoint in terms of international security. The temporary emergency measures are in no way meant to hinder the implementation of this country's international commitments under currently effective treaties and agreements. The Soviet Union is willing to work for further promotion of contacts with all other countries on the universally recognized principles of neighborly relations, equality, mutually advantageous cooperation, and non-interference in each other's affairs. The statement says the current difficulties are temporary, and the Soviet Union will, as ever, do much to promote peace and international security. The Soviet leaders hope other nations and governments and the Organization of the United Nations will show due understanding of the temporary emergency measures. That statement of the Soviet leadership was brought to you by Radio Moscow World Service.
This is Radio Moscow World Service. The State of Emergency Committee has adopted its first decision. It says that to safeguard the vital interests of the nations and citizens of the Soviet Union, its independence and territorial integrity, to restore legality, law and order, to stabilize the situation, to overcome the harsh crisis, and to prevent chaos, anarchy, and a fratricidal civil war, the State of Emergency Committee authorizes all bodies of power and administration to see to it that the state of emergency is strictly observed. In the event of inability to ensure compliance with the state of emergency, the powers of appropriate bodies of government and administration are suspended, and their functions are delegated to the persons specially authorized by the State of Emergency Committee. The decision says that the structures of power and administration and the paramilitary units acting against the USSR Constitution and laws are to be disbanded immediately. It dismisses as invalid the laws and decisions of the bodies of power and administration running counter to the USSR Constitution and laws. The decision suspends activities by the political parties, public organizations, and mass movements, obstructing the normalization of the situation. Citizens, institutions, and organizations are urged to hand in without delay all firearms, rounds of ammunition, explosive devices, and military hardware they illegally possess. Meetings, street processions, demonstrations, and strikes are prohibited. Media are put under control. A body being specially set up at the State of Emergency Committee is to implement this control. The bodies of power and administration, the leaders of offices and enterprises, are to adopt measures to organize work teams better, to restore order and discipline in all spheres of life in society. The decision urges ensuring the normal functioning of enterprises in all the branches of the national economy. It calls for fighting resolutely against black marketeers and start legal and administrative proceedings on facts of corruption, embezzlement, second-hand dealing, the concealment of goods for sale, economic mismanagement, and other abuses in the sphere of economy. The decision urges removing any restrictions obstructing the movement of food and consumer goods across the USSR. Special attention is to be paid to the supply of goods in the first place to preschool children's centers, kindergarten schools, specialized secondary and higher educational establishments, hospitals, pensioners, and disabled persons. The decision expects proposals to be made within a week on how to put into order, freeze and reduce the cost of some consumer goods and foodstuffs, mainly for children, public and catering services, how to raise wages, pensions, allowances, and compensations for various categories of citizens. In view of the critical situation with harvesting and the threat of famine, the decision urges adopting special measures to procure, store, and process crops and help farmers as much as possible. The decision obliges the bodies of power and administration in the center and locally to pay prime attention to the population's social needs, to search for possibilities to significantly improve free medical service and education. That was the first decision issued by the State of Emergency Committee.